Donald Trump, as we know, has been impeached. The Democrats very excited about that victory. Everywhere we turn, they say, you know, the twice impeached former president. And if that label disappears, what else are they going to have? It's going to be very hard for them, but it may actually become a reality. Is it possible to expunge an impeachment? Well, a couple Congress people are trying, including Elise Stefanik and Marjorie Taylor Greene, two House resolutions working their way through Congress. And if the House passes them and Trump does have his impeachments expunged, who's going to argue with the House? As we know, the House can kind of set their own rules and really kind of do whatever they want. The January 6th Select Committee got all of those same benefits. They held fake hearings that were not even in alignment with their own House rules that passed the Select Committee. And so it's kind of a free-for-all in Congress. And if they want to expunge Trump's record, why not? There's a little bit of context here before we take a look at the resolutions. McCarthy and the GOP are now on a collision course, they say, over expunging Donald Trump's impeachment. From the Hill, they tell us that House Republicans increasingly find themselves on a collision course over the battle to expunge Trump's records, a battle that pits the hardline conservatives against the moderates. The promised opposition from centrist Republicans all but ensures the resolution will fail, and it puts McCarthy in a no-win position. But if he doesn't stage the vote, he risks the ire of Trump and his allies. But the measure could be shot down. Latest issue in a long string of debates about the presidential frontrunner. Now, the expungement concept is hardly new. A group of Republicans, including conference chairwoman Elise Stefanik, did introduce a bill that we are going to read. This is designed to erase Trump's impeachments, both of them, from the historical record. Just gone. When Politico reported it, after suggesting publicly that Trump is not the strongest contender, McCarthy raced to make amends with him and, in part, promised a vote on expungement before the end of September. So this may be coming up. McCarthy has denied that he ever made a promise, but the denial only magnified the issue in the public eye, and it amplified the conservative calls for the Speaker to bring the measure for a vote. It should definitely come to the floor and be expunged, says Byron Donalds. I hope it gets done before August, says Marjorie Taylor Greene. Some Republicans who are moderates don't want it to happen, and many others have vowed to vote against it. Others are communicating with leadership, and we'll see what happens, but McCarthy apparently promised that it would be coming up. And here's what they look like. So Marjorie Taylor Greene's is very short, so we'll start with Elise Stefanik. You can see she signed this, the original signature of the member, and the title of this is Expunging the January 13th, 2021 impeachment of Trump. So that's the January 6th election impeachment, not the first impeachment for Ukraine. Ms. Stefanik submits the following resolution. She says, expunging the impeachment of Donald John Trump. It says the Constitution provides that the House of Representatives has the sole power of impeachment and that the president is within their power. On January 13th, the House of Representatives, under the votes of Democrats, impeached Donald Trump. 232 voted yes, 197 voted no. Why? Incitement of insurrection. And we'll see if this comes back up again to try to keep him off the ballots. They say Article 1 of the resolution omits any discussion of the circumstances of the impeachment. They didn't include the unusual voting patterns, and they didn't include the anomalies of the 2020 presidential election itself. They wanted him impeached, but they didn't mention any of that. And prior to considering and voting on the impeachment, Democratic leadership back then made no effort to understand the rationale behind the widespread mistrust harbored by American voters in the wake of 2020. Didn't even care. They just wanted Trump gone and removed. They say Trump won 18 of the 19 bellwether counties across the country, and those counties have predicted the winner in every presidential election since 1980. But something flipped. Weird. President Trump received approximately 10 million more votes than in the presidential election of 2016, making Trump the first incumbent president in 132 years since Grover Cleveland's failed bid to have increased his vote from his initial election and seemingly still not won re-election in the subsequent cycle. They say that secretaries of state and state boards of elections across the country changed, and we covered, I can't count how many lawsuits, changed state election laws sua sponte, which means on their own, voluntarily. They just did it. State election boards, state secretaries of state, they all said, my COVID's everywhere. And they just said, we need to move this, and signatures are waived, and push the ballots back, deadlines back that way, and collect them at the pickup drop boxes, and so on. All in the name of health and safety in the wake of COVID. Public officials in numerous states issued guidance to counties that local election officials were precluded from performing on-the-spot signature analysis, ensuring that absentee ballots could not be rejected because an election official believed that the signatures on the ballot did not match the signature on file. Well, it's close enough for us. 4 Democratic lawmakers, Senator Warren, Klobuchar, Wyden, and a Representative Pocan, formerly enthusiastic proponents of voting machine integrity, went so far as to send a 2019 letter to various voting system companies, providing real examples of voting machine problems, like switching votes, rejecting paper ballots, vulnerabilities to cyber attacks. And yet, those same senators following the 2020 presidential election, any individual who raised the same concerns was dismissed by the Democrats and by pundits in the mainstream media as spreading misinformation and as being nothing more than a conspiracy theorist. Yeah, we lived through that here, man. Whereas the recount efforts following the 2020 election were vociferously opposed by governors and secretaries of states like Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Georgia. They all said, look good to me. Public officials in key swing states ignored and took great steps to resist calls for accountability and transparency in election administration and the counting and recounting of ballots in their respective states, further sowing the seeds of doubt in the electorate as to the legitimacy and fairness in the final result. And that rather than setting forth facts and evidence supporting the need to impeach a president a matter of days before he leaves office, and they did that for leverage. They didn't want him to pardon Julian Assange or anybody else. They didn't want the conviction. And so they went around and they said, if you do these things, all these senators are going to convict you. And he didn't. Article 1 of the resolution cites two quotes from President Trump's J6 speech on the ellipse that lack any context, and they're viewed in a light most unfavorable to the president. She says that Article 1 of the resolution that impeached Donald Trump, it grasps at the fact that President Trump stated, we won this election and we won it by a landslide, as well as if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore, as well as undeniable evidence that high crimes and misdemeanors were committed and that the president engaged in insurrection and rebellion against the United States. And they say that the resolution also, the one that impeached Trump, it conveniently fails to mention the fact that Trump explicitly stated, I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol to, there it is, peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. Why didn't they include that in there? The resolution by the House failed to follow any meaningful legislative process whatsoever. Of course, same with January 6th Select Committee. H.R. 503, when you look it up, it says that it's supposed to have a certain number of members on the body. There weren't. They violated their own rules, they are in control of the House of Representatives, so they can just do whatever they want. Whereas not a single evidentiary hearing on the resolution was held. No witnesses were heard. No process or opportunity to respond were provided to Trump. No members of Congress were provided an opportunity to review or amend the resolution before it came before the full House of Representatives for consideration. And the Committee on Rules in the House is the only committee that published an official committee report in violation of the rules. A majority staff report was released by the Judiciary Committee, but they did not issue a final report. And failing to do this precludes the Judiciary Committee from showcasing their dissenting views. So their process was absconded. They say that to assert that a lone committee report accompanying a procedural rule for a floor consideration provided sufficient due process to Trump and to support that this was justified is contrary to the oath of office taken by every member here. Trump was convicted or impeached without due process. They just crammed it through. Neither the committee report issued by the House Rules Committee nor the text of the impeachment itself contain any mention of the text of Section 3, Article 1 of the Constitution, which provides judgment shall not extend further than removal from office. They say a plain reading of this text says that an official tried and convicted must first occupy office from which he is to be removed and is forever disqualified from holding any office under the United States, saying that frantically trying to pass this resolution only 2 days after it was introduced in a frenzy of hysteria, House Democrats and 10 House Republicans left the Senate only 1 week to conduct a complete trial and convict President Trump before he left office. So he didn't do anything crazy on the way out. It said it left the Senate virtually no chance chance to comport with the Constitution, and unsurprisingly, 31 days passed before the Senate held a vote and failed to convict Trump 23 days after he had left office. It was the dumbest timeline. They say further indication of this partisan political motivation behind the resolution. Once the articles of impeachment was passed by the House of Representatives and transmitted to the Senate, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court refused to serve the presiding officer for the trial, as required by the Constitution. And instead, the Senate President, Patrick Leahy, a Democrat from Vermont, a partisan politician, he served as the presiding officer over the trial, saying there was nothing more unconstitutional. This is an exercise in futility, it's moot, and it's fantastical political theater. Judge Roberts didn't even sit as required by the Constitution. So in other words, this impeachment is invalid on itself. Although he wasn't impeached, he wasn't convicted. But in the Senate, the trial wasn't even comported properly. So he wasn't convicted in the Senate, but the way they comported the Senate trial was still outside of the constitutional bounds. So they say, all of that being said, all 6 pages of that, all those problems, therefore be it resolved that the January 13th impeachment of Donald Trump is hereby expunged, as if such an article had never passed the House of Representatives, as the facts and circumstances upon which the article was based met the burden of proving neither that President Trump committed high crimes or misdemeanors, nor that he engaged in insurrection or rebellion, such that he is forever precluded from holding office pursuant to the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. And I'm still very curious if the governments throughout this country in various states are going to use this impeachment to stop him from running, to try to keep him off the ballots when they start to generate the ballots during the primary season and the general election. So this is Elise Stefanik's resolution to expunge that and just make it crystal clear that it is no longer on the record, so that if any other states do literally try to keep him off the books, they can't use Congress as a pretext to do it. Now, we'll see if that vote comes up before January. Now, there's another much shorter resolution. This one was entered by Marjorie Taylor Greene, and this one gets the first impeachment, the one from 2019. She says, this one says that President Trump was wrongfully accused of misconduct in a prior House resolution, the one that impeached Donald Trump for high crimes and misdemeanors. But now we have an unclassified FD 1023 document, and therefore this resolution says that the impeachment of Donald Trump is hereby expunged, as if the articles had never passed the House of Representatives, and that the government did not meet the burden of proving the commission of high crimes and misdemeanors as required under the Constitution. And that's it from Marjorie Taylor Greene. And we saw that Stefanik's gives us some very nice details here about why the underlying impeachment was problematic and why it needs to go. And so now we see the Democrats very upset about this. Nancy Pelosi led these impeachments, and here she is on CNN talking about her reaction to the efforts by Republicans to remove them.
I want to play something that you said just days after the January 6th attack.
A ton. And if you're Donald Trump talking to these people, they believe it. And they used his words to come here. The crime, in some cases, was murder. Yeah. And this president is an accessory to that crime because he instigated that insurrection that caused those deaths and this destruction.
Do you still believe, as you did then, that Donald Trump committed a crime?
First, let me thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Congratulations to you on your 30 years. It seems impossible, but nonetheless, how wonderful. The president is not above the law. I'm afraid what I heard the vice president say earlier, as much as I admire him, he was a hero that day, Mike Pence was. The president is not above the law. We saw what happened. It was very clear.
What happened?
It's heartbreaking because
you were waiting for this.
My motto for all these things, and the flag was still there. Being from Baltimore, a national anthem written there, and the flag was still there. We always have to make sure that it's about the rule of law and about freedom of speech and all of that. And he has, I mean, the courts will act. He has innocent until proven guilty.
But what does justice look like to you?
No.
Well, justice has to be something that relates to the facts and the law.
When we win,
what are the facts? What is the law? Now make the case.
And
I've been through this so many times in the Congress on ethics cases and the rest of that.
a lot of my political
Nothing about rumor, nothing about reputation, nothing about hearsay, the facts and the law.
In a private call, the now Speaker Kevin McCarthy told the former president that he supported the idea of expunging Trump's two impeachments, but apparently
Nancy?
he didn't commit to bringing it to the floor for a vote. You oversaw both of those impeachment
What do you
proceedings.
think,
What's your
Nancy?
reaction to this notion?
Well, the president was impeached because we had no choice.
Because we hate him.
He had undermined our national security, jeopardized our well-being of our country. I was very careful about bringing any impeachment forward. But when the president made that phone call in terms of Ukraine,
yeah, he busted
there was
you
no
guys.
choice.
Yeah, he busted
We had
you.
no choice. He must be impeached.
Yeah.
Kevin is, playing politics. It's not even clear if he constitutionally can expunge those things.
Who cares?
If he wants to put his members on the spot, his
who cares?
members in difficult races on the
Constitution.
spot, that's a decision he has to make. But this is not responsible. This is not about the flag still being there. This is about being afraid. As I've said before, Donald Trump is the puppeteer. And what does he do all the time but shine the light on the strings? These people look pathetic.
So they don't like it at all. These people look pathetic, man. They really want that impeachment to stick because they worked so hard on it. I mean, they made up a ton of stuff in order to get that first impeachment through. And then they created an entire insurrection to get the second impeachment through. And now these dang Republicans are just going to go and pass a resolution and they're going to undo all of that. Oh, man, they're angry about it. So is stinky Eric Swalwell. Listen to him. He's all fired up, too, over there on MSNBC.
I want to start, before we even get sort of the Trump piece of this and the legal piece of this, by talking about what is happening in your legislative body, because you have Kevin McCarthy moving forward with efforts to expunge both of Trump's impeachments. You were an impeachment manager for Trump's first impeachment trial.
Oh, he'd be mad.
What do you make of that effort? What is it they are trying to do and why?
Wreck America. Ruin my life.
Expunging Donald Trump by way of Kevin McCarthy, Alicia, it's weak, it's predictably pathetic from Speaker McCarthy. And when I think about expungement, I think, what are you going to do about that day? Are you going to make it go away? Or are we going to forget that it ever happened? Will it never be taught to our children?
Never.
An expungement is not going to bring back the sight for the officer who lost his eye that day. It's not going to put a finger back on the hand of the officer who lost a finger that day. It's not going to bring Officer Sicknick back to life. It only benefits one person, and that happens to be the person who aimed and inspired the mob to bring the hell and the fury that they brought to January 6th, Donald Trump. Again, it's a weak, pathetic move. It does nothing to change what happened that day, and it will do nothing to stop another January 6th if we were to allow it to happen. So I dare every Republican, especially the 19 in the Biden districts, I dare you to vote to expunge Donald Trump. And by the way, the guy is probably going to get indicted for what he did on January 6th. So it'd be, pretty interesting to see them do that, and the timing would be quite exquisite if that's the route that they want to go.
Young Fang is getting
about those 19 Republicans who are in Biden districts. Do you have any sense that Kevin McCarthy understands the fire that he is playing with, that he understands the position he would be putting members of his own caucus in were he to bring this for a vote on the House floor?
He doesn't, because he's had, the 19 Biden Republicans, vote for the most extreme measures, to deprive women of making decisions about their bodies. He's put up votes, that would hurt our veterans so that we would not end up paying, America's bills and lifting the debt ceiling. And by the way, the government is heading toward a shutdown because the craziest of the MAGA caucus are already saying that we have to shut down the government. And so these 19 Biden Republicans, by the way, many of them in districts that are going to be redrawn because they were the result of, dirty gerrymandering back in 2020, they are squarely in peril. And they've shown every single time that they're going to choose MAGA chaos over the good of the community.
All right, so that is stinky Eric Swalwell. Very irritating. I mean, I dare you, Kev. I dare you to do it. And we'll see if anything comes from that. But of course, to round out the impeachment trio, we've got pencil neck Adam Schiff, who is saying that McCarthy is once again a puppet of Trump.
Congressman Schiff, as you know, Speaker McCarthy has said he supports expunging Donald Trump's impeachments. What do you make of that prospect, especially as the lead impeachment manager for his first impeachment?
There's no constitutional provision, no constitutional mechanism to do such a thing.
What?
It's a farce. That doesn't.
First of all, what is going to be done in terms of enforceability? Are you going to sue to stop it? Because every time anybody challenged your garbage January 6th Select Committee for being illegally constituted, the courts just said, nothing we can do about that. Sorry. It's the House rules. The House governs themselves. If they want to, by their laws, require 13 people to be on a January 6th Select Committee and then only put 9 on there, they're allowed to do that. If it says 8 Democrats, 5 Republicans, but it's only 7 Democrats and 2 Republicans, who cares? We can't do anything about it, says the courts. So if Congress here wants to expunge Trump's records, it's their Congress. What are the courts going to say about it? Nothing. And then Donald Trump can say, got my expungements. Eat it, Adam.
I mean, they won't do it. McCarthy and the Republican leadership in Congress have shown that there is no floor below which they will not sink to debase themselves for Donald Trump. And so we could very well have a vote on it. It will be a meaningless stop to their most flawed, unethical leader. And, Kevin McCarthy probably won't have any problem with that.
We'll see if it happens. I'll be looking forward to it. It's going to be as valid as anything else they do. They just pass laws and they just say it's constitutional because we said so. And they run the House of Representatives like it's a free-for-all. If the Republicans played even remotely close to their level, they would have already started impeachments, but they don't. And maybe that's why they'll continue to lose.